So here's a quick update on the application I've worked on. So this is this next generation of like Google Spreadsheet or like Excel sheets that you can use. So the idea is kind of that instead of focusing on cells and like how they relate to each other and like how like perform the computation on top of them, we just focus on the data itself and we model the flow of it so that you can see that each one of those elements, each one of those nodes here in the graph represent some kind of, let's call it variable or like element in this whole process. So for example, like bread prices that are loaded or like breads by month data, we can see them and view them in multiple different ways. And then we can take those and like group them using another formula here at the top and like get some insights or like do some transformations on top of it. So what what has changed since the last video, and maybe like just also explaining some of the concepts that are happening, is that we focus more on the like what like in this graph view we focus more on what this data is and what it's meant to be representing and like what shape of this data is. So for example, you can notice that there is like a unit, so this is just the item, and then we have some axes of the data that we loaded, so we can see that it's like the dimension of it is like we have data per month, so that's why the dimension is month. And then we also have some like user readable description so that we can kind of like step by step, as if it was like a code comment, step by step read what is happening and why it's happening in this whole transformation flow. So for example, here, when we compute like monthly revenue, we also see that it's like in US dollars, also like across months, and also like some kind of description of like why it's happening and like what it can be used for or like useful for. Apart from that, some utility or like usability enhancement. So for example, we care more about shape of the data than the data itself. So we don't really show each particular value. um, we can do it like, for example, if we view the table, but we are more interested in the actual like shape of it. So like units, the shape of the matrix that is underneath it, or if it's like a one-dimensional, two-dimensional, three-dimensional, etc. So that's kind of what we're interested in. And also this dice icon that you can see here is basically telling us that this particular element will be like prone or like will be affected by the randomness or like the analysis that we might want to perform, and might want to get some insights based on. So like some uncertainties and some distribution like normal, triangular, etc. So maybe just to show the full width of it or like full scope of what we can do. So we have a model. So this is just like this stochastic retail. And the main thing that we usually want to do is to load some data into it. So think about it as like a connector. So you can load like a CSV, or like you can load, or like for simple inputs, you can also create them. So for example, we have sales data that we can preview here. This is just a CSV with some units information, but we can also go in here and like provide a name for it, some description, and like maybe modify if we think that it's not really accurate. Adding rows, adding columns, etc. It's all like happening automatically. The updates themselves, we can delete it. And then when we actually have this loaded data, then we create something that is called measurement. So the measurement is something that like some actual transformation of this data. So for example, in this scenario, we have like products sold, like number of products sold by month. And what we actually can do is pivot this table and get the actual information in form of matrix. So not really like just a table like with like repeated names of the products, etc. But we actually pivot across products, pivot across month, and then we take units as a value that actually is inside of it. All of those is like overridable. We can preview it here and like do whatever we want. And think about it this way: this is just some connection with the data source. So like CSVs, like potentially you can get data from like databases or anything that you can fetch data from. Then you model the process in the model, and it's just the similar idea that I explained in last video. So we have like each one of those, and the measurement itself is a variable, like it's an element that has a name. So like this dollar sign and the name, and you can do something with it. So you can define it as like a normal distribution in this case, but you can also combine them using like fairly standard Python formulas. And at the end of the day, it's just performing this computation and assigning the value of that formula to that element. And it's like used, it can be used like somewhere else as a dependency, etc. And so that's pretty much like, if you think about it, like non-stochastic, no non-randomness affected processes, that's pretty much it. So you can just model it, you see the results, they're computed like the moment you change something. But then you can also go into analysis and you can actually run it. So for example, let's run quickly the Monte Carlo simulation. And okay, so it took a moment. We have it here, and the thing that is actually happening in this one is that we like run this as a simulation, right? So we had those 1,000 runs. Each one of them introduces this slightly different choice of the random variables. And in here in the graphs that you actually see is that there is actually some like probability applied. So they are not like just one value, but you can see the distribution of them. So for example, in here or here, you can also like see the normal distribution like on the graph, on the line graph, or maybe like the sensitivity or like cumulative probability and other stuff. So that's pretty much it. If you think about the overall process and the overall like stuff that are happening, um, yeah, um, I know it's more from like technical perspective. If you're interested in this kind of project, I can also dive into some like technical details. Just let me know. Bye.